Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was humiliated right at the airport when security staff treated him like a suspect. They thoroughly searched him, refusing to listen to his explanations until the truth was revealed, leaving everyone in shock. Was this a shameful mistake, or is there something more behind it? The truth will astound you. That morning, Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, buzzed with activity. Long lines of passengers stood at the check-in counters, announcements echoed throughout, and people moved continuously without pause. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson pulled his compact suitcase into the security area. He had no bodyguards, no assistants with him, just a tall man in a gray hoodie, black sweatpants, and sunglasses. With his immense fame, Dwayne was used to being recognized everywhere. But today, it seemed like no one noticed him, which was exactly what he wanted. He just wanted a peaceful morning to quickly finish the procedures and head to New York for an important charity event. However, as he approached the security checkpoint, he didn't expect that his simple appearance would make him a suspect. Not far away, Mike, a young security officer, was observing passengers as they went through the scanner. As a newcomer to the job, Mike took his work seriously. He was always careful, never overlooking any detail. Today, he was tasked with checking passengers at Security Gate 7. As he scanned the crowd, Mike suddenly noticed a tall man with an enigmatic look, wearing a hoodie that covered his head and sunglasses that hid most of his face. "Hey, do you see that guy?" Mike whispered to his colleague standing next to him. "Who?" The colleague looked in the direction Mike pointed. "That tall guy in the gray hoodie." He seems normal, but you're right, he does look a little suspicious." Mike nodded. The training rules from airport security were clear in his mind. Anyone covering their face, avoiding eye contact, or deliberately evading security checks could be a potential threat. And this man seemed to fit all those criteria. "I think it's best to do a more thorough check," Mike said with determination. His colleague shrugged, not too concerned, but Mike didn't want to take any chances. He moved toward the checkpoint, ready to intercept anything suspicious. Meanwhile, Dwayne continued calmly toward the security area, unaware that he was becoming the focus of an overzealous security officer. He took off his sunglasses for a moment, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and then put them back on. He only had a small backpack with him. Inside was a laptop, headphones, some paperwork, and a box of cookies he brought along for breakfast on the plane. As he stood in line, he noticed some passengers ahead of him looking at him curiously, perhaps recognizing him. A young woman nearby whispered to her friend, "Oh my God, is that The Rock? He totally looks like him, but why is he alone?" Dwayne heard them but just smiled lightly. He was already so used to situations like this. However, he didn't know that a security officer was approaching, ready to conduct a more thorough check than usual. Mike walked closer to the security area where Dwayne stood. He paused for a moment, observing more closely. The man seemed unusually calm, a sign that, according to training manuals, could indicate someone hiding something. Mike decided not to miss this opportunity. "Excuse me, sir," Mike spoke in a calm but firm voice. Dwayne looked up at him. "Hello? I need to do a more thorough check before you pass through security. Could you please remove your sunglasses and lower your hood?" Dwayne raised an eyebrow but complied calmly. He took off his sunglasses and lowered his hood, revealing his face. "Thank you. Could you please hand me your passport and boarding pass for inspection?" Dwayne took his passport out of his pocket and handed it to Mike, still unaware that this officer didn't recognize him. Mike took the passport, carefully examining the photo, then looked up at Dwayne. And instead of relaxing, Mike became even more suspicious. Mike gently gripped the radio at his side, his eyes following the tall man as he approached the security checkpoint. Unlike the other passengers, some fumbling for their passports, others chatting or absorbed in their phones, this man had an unsettling calm about him. He didn't seem flustered as he neared the security area, nor did he appear rushed or impatient. Instead, each step he took was firm, strong, and decisive, but it was too controlled. Mike frowned. A suspicious person wouldn't show signs of nervousness. They'd try to appear calm, and that was exactly what made him wary. For experienced security staff, this job was sometimes just a series of repetitive procedures. They were used to checking hundreds of passengers every day, used to seeing people rush, tense, or annoyed at having to stand in long lines. But Mike was different. He was still a rookie, still had the instinctive wariness of an eager new recruit, and that instinct was telling him to do something now. He turned to his colleague, Rob, a more seasoned officer, and whispered, "Do you see that guy?" Rob glanced at Dwayne for a moment, then shrugged. "Yeah, he looks a bit intimidating, huh? Like some kind of tough guy." Mike nodded. A tough guy, or worse. Rob chuckled, ready to return to his work, but Mike stood still, eyes never leaving the man. "You suspicious of something?" Rob asked, his tone a bit more interested now. "I don't think that's the Rock," Mike said. "What celebrity travels alone like this?" Rob paused, considering it. It didn't make sense. A star like Dwayne Johnson usually had bodyguards, assistants, or at least a few people with him. But this man was alone, carrying a simple backpack, not looking like someone preparing to board a luxury flight. Mike took a deep breath, then made his decision. "I think we should check him more thoroughly." Rob glanced at Mike, seeing the sharp focus in his eyes, and shrugged. "Do what you think is right." Mike wasn't the type to be unnecessarily paranoid. His vigilance came from a painful experience in his past. A year ago, when he was an intern in security, Mike had overlooked a suspicious person, thinking it was just a regular man in a hurry to catch a flight. He hadn't reported it or done a thorough check, and just 3 hours later, a major incident occurred on that flight. Although he wasn't the one directly responsible, the haunting memory of that mistake stuck with him. From that day on, Mike made a promise to himself. He would never make that mistake again. By now, Dwayne Johnson had reached the security area. He took off his sunglasses briefly to rub his nose, then put them back on. Mike noticed this. People trying to hide their identity often did that, intentionally avoiding showing their face for too long. There was also one more thing that made him more suspicious: the way Dwayne Johnson stood. He wasn't standing still like the other passengers. He had a solid stance, feet slightly wider than shoulder width apart, like someone always ready for a confrontation. No, this wasn't the posture of someone relaxed while waiting for security. It looked more like the stance of a warrior, someone accustomed to being attacked and ready to react at any moment. So, who was this man, really? Mike tightened his grip on the radio once more, then took a deep breath. It was time to act. He stepped forward, walking straight up to Dwayne Johnson, and spoke in a calm yet authoritative voice. "Hello, sir." Dwayne looked up at him. "Hey there. I need to do a more thorough check before you pass through security. Could you please remove your sunglasses and lower your hood?" Dwayne raised an eyebrow but complied with a calm demeanor. "Thank you," Could you also provide me with your passport and boarding pass for inspection? Dwayne took his passport from his pocket and handed it to Mike, still unaware that this officer had no idea who he was. Mike took the passport, studying the photo, then looked up at Dwayne. And, instead of relaxing, Mike became even more suspicious. Mike stared at the passport in his hand, then looked up at the man in front of him. All the information on the document checked out, but deep down, he still felt something was off. Dwayne Johnson, an A-list star, a man with millions of followers worldwide, could appear here alone, with no one by his side, no assistant, no bodyguard. Mike had never seen The Rock in person, but he had seen many photos and videos online. The man in front of him certainly had a striking resemblance to Dwayne Johnson. A massive build, a strong jawline, sharp eyes, but something still didn't seem right. He pushed aside any personal assumptions and decided to rely on procedure to verify everything. Could you please remove your sunglasses and hood? Mike's voice lowered, but he maintained a professional tone. Dwayne smiled, seemingly unbothered. He took off his sunglasses and removed his hood, revealing his face completely. Some nearby passengers started whispering. A few had recognized him. "Oh my God, is that The Rock?" "Yeah, but why is the security checking him so thoroughly?" However, Mike remained unfazed. He picked up the passport again and compared it with the face in front of him. His eyes scrutinized every tiny detail. The jawline, the eyebrows, the small scar above his left eyebrow, everything matched. But his gut instinct still wouldn't let him relax. "Could you open your bag, please?" Mike continued his request. Dwayne gently placed his backpack on the inspection table, unzipped it, and pushed it toward Mike. "Sure." Mike bent down, widened the bag's opening, and inspected the contents. Dwayne's bag was simple: a laptop, headphones, a few neatly folded clothes, personal documents, and a box of cookies. Nothing unusual. But then Mike's gaze stopped on a small object in the inner compartment. A sleek black metal box, heavy to the touch. Mike immediately grew cautious. He put on gloves and carefully pulled the item out. "Can you explain what this is?" he asked. Dwayne tilted his head, then chuckled. "That's my supplement box. I carry it to take during my workouts." Mike didn't relax his vigilance. He turned to another security officer. "Check it with the chemical scanner." The atmosphere grew tense. A few nearby passengers curiously glanced over, some even pulling out their phones to film. A minute later, the officer returned and nodded at Mike. "There's nothing unusual. It's just supplements." Dwayne laughed, shrugging. "See? I told you." Mike didn't respond to his joke. He was still suspicious. Mike's heart raced faster. He knew his instincts couldn't be wrong. Dwayne Johnson might be a celebrity. But what if this was an imposter? What if this was someone with malicious intent, pretending to be a famous person to slip past security? A bold thought flashed through Mike's mind. The facial recognition system could help verify this. He quickly signaled to his colleague, "Check his information on the facial recognition system." Dwayne raised an eyebrow, his first sign of surprise. "Really? You're serious?" Mike nodded, saying nothing. Another security officer immediately entered the data into the system, using the camera to scan Dwayne's face. It took less than 10 seconds for the screen to light up. A warning message appeared. "Alert! This individual may be linked to an ongoing surveillance case." Mike froze. Dwayne also saw the message. A brief moment of confusion passed through his eyes. The people around them started whispering even more. A senior officer walked over, looked at the screen, and then turned to Mike with a serious tone. "Hold him. We need to do a deeper check." Mike took a deep breath. This was the moment he had anticipated. He looked directly at Dwayne Johnson. "Sir, we need you to come with us to a private inspection room." The airport seemed to pause for a few seconds. The atmosphere around them grew more tense than ever. Dwayne stood still, his eyes cold and sharp. No one knew what would happen next. The red text on the computer screen cut through the already tense atmosphere like a sharp knife. "Warning. This individual may be involved in an ongoing surveillance case." Mike didn't blink, his heart pounding. This was no longer a feeling of doubt or speculation. It was an official warning from the airport security system. A small mistake could cost him his job, but if he let a dangerous person slip through, the consequences would be far more serious. He gripped the radio at his side, quickly organizing the situation in his mind. In front of him, Dwayne Johnson stood still. No sign of panic or anger, just sharp, unwavering eyes. "What's going on?" His voice was deep but commanding. Mike didn't answer right away. He knew he couldn't hesitate. A wrong decision now could trigger an alarm throughout the entire security system. "We need to conduct a more thorough check. Please follow me." As soon as those words left his mouth, the atmosphere around them changed instantly. A few nearby passengers instinctively stepped back, their eyes showing clear signs of wariness. Others quickly pulled out their phones to record. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone understood that having a giant like Dwayne Johnson being invited by security was no small matter. Whispers erupted. "What's happening? Oh my God, they're holding the rock. Do you think he did something wrong?" But Mike didn't have time to care about the crowd's reaction. He immediately lifted the radio. "Need assistance at Security Checkpoint 7. Possible match to a wanted individual. Requesting high-level security team immediately." Within seconds, 3 senior security officers arrived from other checkpoints. One of them was Harris, the airport security team leader. "Mike, what's the situation?" Harris asked cautiously. Mike turned the computer screen towards Harris to show him the glaring red warning. "The system has flagged him as a match to a person under surveillance. No official confirmation yet, but I think further checks are necessary." Harris frowned. He had worked at this airport for over 20 years, and if there was one thing he knew for sure, it was that the identification system sometimes made mistakes. But there were also times when those mistakes led to crucial discoveries. He looked at Dwayne Johnson, evaluating him from head to toe. "Sir, this is just a standard security procedure. We need your cooperation." Dwayne looked straight at Harris. "I have no problem with security checks." His voice was calm, but his gaze was sharp, as though he could read the minds of those around him. Mike froze for a moment. Dwayne's reaction didn't seem like someone with something to hide. No panic, no avoidance, just complete calm. But protocol was protocol. He couldn't let personal feelings influence his decision. Harris motioned. 2 security officers stood on either side of Dwayne, one holding a radio, ready to call for backup if necessary. Mike stepped forward, his tone serious. "Sir, please follow us to a private inspection room. We just want to make sure everything is clear." Dwayne nodded slowly. He didn't show any signs of resistance, but he didn't seem particularly comfortable either. He walked forward with steady, long strides. The security officers followed closely behind. The surrounding passengers stood still, watching in silence. Those who recognized Dwayne Johnson were completely surprised. "No way! That's The Rock. It must be a mistake." But what if it's not a mistake? Doubt lingered in the air. As they turned down the hallway towards the private inspection room, Mike briefly glanced at the phone screen of a nearby passenger. The news was exploding on social media. Within minutes, hashtags "The Rock Held Up LAX Airport" began trending on Twitter and Instagram. Mike could feel the heat of the situation creeping through his body. If this was just a system error, it would become one of the most embarrassing security incidents he'd ever faced. But what if his gut feeling was right? A chilling thought flashed through his mind. What if this isn't the real Dwayne Johnson? The security inspection room was right ahead. The door swung open, and the space inside seemed to swallow them into an unpredictable storm of tension. The door to the security check room slammed shut behind him, cutting off all the chaotic sounds of the airport outside. The room was small, simple, but cold, with only a metal table in the center, a few chairs, and surveillance cameras mounted on the ceiling. Mike stepped forward, feeling his heartbeat gradually quickening with each passing second. The tension in the room was palpable, as if it could be sliced into pieces. Harris, the airport security chief, stood with his arms crossed in the corner of the room, watching everything without saying a word. Two other security officers stood near the door, their eyes fixed on the large man sitting in front of them. Dwayne Johnson calmly pulled out a chair, leaned back against it, and placed his hands on the table, interlaced. He didn't show any discomfort or concern, but there was something odd in his gaze, an intense, careful observation, as if he was evaluating each person in the room. Mike took a deep breath, regaining his focus, and placed his hands on the table. "Do you have anything dangerous with you?" Dwayne raised an eyebrow, then suddenly chuckled. "Does my muscle count?" No one in the room reacted. Mike remained stern, not letting himself be drawn into the false sense of ease the man in front of him was trying to create. "I'm not joking," Mike said firmly. Dwayne tilted his head, a slight smile curling on his lips. "Don't you really know who I am?" Mike locked eyes with him. "You're just a regular passenger to me." The room fell into silence. A brief flash of surprise crossed Dwayne's face, but he quickly regained his composure. Mike flipped through the passport again, checking every word, every immigration stamp. Everything was in order. He continued checking the flight ticket. It matched the system perfectly. Dwayne's luggage had already been checked twice, but Mike still felt something was off. That feeling lingered, refusing to leave him. Harris suddenly moved closer, standing right behind Mike, then leaned in slightly to whisper, "Do you know who you're checking?" Mike didn't take his eyes off the paperwork. "A passenger the system misidentified." "No, you're checking The Rock." Mike stopped, slowly lifting his head. His eyes met Harris's, and in that moment, an indescribable sensation flooded his chest. The Rock? His hand tightened around the passport, and he looked at the man sitting across from him once more. He looked exactly like Dwayne Johnson. But something was wrong. Mike swallowed hard, trying to stay firm. So, if he really is Dwayne Johnson, why did the system flag him? Harris paused for a moment, then turned to Dwayne. "Sir, we need to verify some additional information. Could you tell us your recent travel schedule?" Dwayne raised an eyebrow as if he couldn't believe he was actually being questioned. Really? Are you guys serious? We're just following protocol. Dwayne exhaled slowly. Fine. I just flew in from Hawaii last night. Stayed at the Ritz-Carlton. This morning I have a flight to New York for a charity event. You can check my booking if you want. Mike immediately typed the information into the system. Less than a minute later, the result came back. No booking under Dwayne Johnson's name at the Ritz-Carlton last night. He slowly turned his head, his gaze sharper than ever. Are you sure? This time, the smile on Dwayne's face faded. A flicker of something passed in his eyes. Was it caution, discomfort, or a mistake? Harris also noticed the oddity. Sir, maybe you confused the hotel. We can't find any record of your stay there. Dwayne was silent for a moment. Then he smiled, but this time it was a forced one. Maybe my assistant booked the room under a different name. Harris glanced at Mike. No one spoke, but they both knew that a liar would usually offer justifications slower than usual. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Mike felt every cell in his body scream. Was this man really Dwayne Johnson? Mike clenched his fists, his mind racing faster than ever. If he was wrong, the consequences could be severe. But if he was right... He took a deep breath, then stood up straight. I think we need another verification method. Harris looked at him a little surprised. What do you have in mind? We need to contact Dwayne Johnson's manager or family. If he's really The Rock, it won't take long to confirm. The room fell into a heavy silence. Dwayne stared at Mike. For the first time since entering the room, he wasn't smiling. His gaze was cold, sharp enough to cut through the air. That was not the look of an innocent man. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. Mike pressed the intercom. Call the main office. We need to verify his identity right now. The game was over, or at least that's what Mike thought. The special examination room was still filled with a tense atmosphere. Mike's thoughts were like a storm, relentlessly spiraling around the most important question at that moment. Is the man in front of him really Dwayne Johnson? His instincts were still sounding an invisible alarm. The mismatched data, the coldness in the man's eyes, the slower-than-usual response when questioned, all were signs that this was not a simple misunderstanding. But before Mike could take any further action, the examination room door suddenly swung open. A man in a higher-ranking security uniform entered, his eyes immediately locking onto the man sitting across from Mike. He froze. His eyes widened, mouth agape as though he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Mike, you're holding Dwayne Johnson. The whole room seemed to freeze for a moment. Mike felt a chill run down his spine. He turned his head to look at the colleague who had just entered, then back at Dwayne. What? The confirmation from a senior staff member completely turned everything upside down. Mike quickly double-checked the passport in his hand, then looked up at the man in front of him. Everything was in order. The picture, the information, the entry stamp, everything was valid. The doubt that had been building up inside him like a solid wall now wavered violently. Are you sure it's really you? Mike's voice wavered slightly, but he still tried to keep his composure. The man sitting in front of him raised an eyebrow, then chuckled, a deep laugh, full of confidence but also tinged with mockery. I don't think I'm cosplaying as myself. Dwayne Johnson's smile, combined with the absolute confidence in his voice, left Mike stunned for a moment. Could all of his doubts have been a mistake? Harris, the security captain, sighed, shaking his head as though he couldn't believe the situation. "Mike, you just doubted one of the most famous stars in the world." Mike felt his face flush with embarrassment. He was still confused, but at the same time, he began to feel ashamed. If this really was Dwayne Johnson, what he had just done could become an embarrassing incident for the whole airport security team. He glanced around at his colleagues in the room. Some seemed to be holding back laughs. Others looked at him with pity. Mike stepped back, trying to take a deep breath. Had he just made a huge mistake? Harris turned to Dwayne Johnson, his voice more professional. "Honestly, Mr. Johnson, it seems there's been a serious misunderstanding here." Dwayne shrugged, as if it didn't bother him too much. "It's okay. I understand. Airport security is just doing its job." Mike heard those words, but deep inside, something still felt off. A voice in his head whispered that he couldn't just dismiss his doubts because of a colleague's confirmation. Something was wrong. But where? Should Mike dismiss his gut feeling and accept that this really was Dwayne Johnson? Or should he double-check, despite the risk of making himself the laughingstock of the security team? As Mike was still wrestling with his inner turmoil, Dwayne Johnson stood up, adjusted his jacket, and prepared to leave the examination room. At that moment, Mike had an important choice to make. What would he do? Mike stood frozen in place, feeling as if everything around him was slowing down. Every eye in the room was on him, waiting for a reaction, an explanation, or at least some way for him to justify his actions. His throat was dry, and his hands instinctively clenched at his sides as if holding on to some semblance of reality amid the chaos of his thoughts. He couldn't believe that just a few minutes ago he had been so certain, even willing to stake his entire professional reputation on it. But now, with his superior colleague's confirmation and Dwayne Johnson's flawless demeanor, everything he had believed in was slowly crumbling. There was no turning back now, no reasonable excuse to stand firm any longer. Mike swallowed hard, took a step forward, his lips moving as if to say something but hesitating. Finally, he took a deep breath and lowered his head slightly, his voice full of regret but still tinged with a sense of disorientation. "Oh my, I'm so sorry. I didn't recognize you." Dwayne Johnson looked at Mike with calm, deep eyes, yet there was a hint of amusement hidden within. Unlike many other celebrities who might react with anger or irritation when detained unjustly, he just laughed. A low, confident laugh, not at all boastful. Without hesitation, Dwayne patted Mike's shoulder lightly, a touch not too strong, but enough to make him feel the presence of the man before him. "It's all right. You're just doing your job." At that moment, the tension in the room seemed to dissolve. The other security personnel began to relax, some whispering to each other, others shaking their heads as if to laugh at the awkward situation Mike had just found himself in. Harris, the head of security, also nodded at Dwayne, his face more at ease now that things hadn't escalated further. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Johnson. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." Dwayne shrugged lightly, a smile forming on his lips, making it seem as though none of what had just happened was worth stressing over. "No problem at all. Actually, I'm glad airport security is this thorough, right? Better safe than sorry." The room filled with light laughter, and the atmosphere shifted to one of ease, no longer tense and suffocating. Some of the other staff exchanged glances, as if to say that Mike had just experienced one of the most memorable moments of his career, and perhaps by tomorrow This story would spread among the security team as a funny anecdote. But amidst the laughter, as everyone slowly returned to their work, Mike still felt that something wasn't quite right. The weight in his chest didn't disappear. If anything, it grew heavier, like an undercurrent of something ominous. He had doubted his instincts before, but this time, despite all the evidence pointing to a simple misunderstanding, he couldn't fully accept it. Everything had gone too smoothly, too perfectly to be believable. The man before him, though looking exactly like Dwayne Johnson, with the same smile, voice, and mannerisms, had something deeper, something that Mike couldn't shake, a feeling of unease that wouldn't leave. He looked down at his hand, realizing that his palm was still slightly damp with sweat, not from worry, but because adrenaline was still surging through his veins. His intuition was telling him something his rational mind, fueled by embarrassment and pressure from his colleagues, was trying to ignore. Dwayne had stood up, adjusting his jacket, and glanced at Mike one last time before turning to leave the room. But in that instant, in the fleeting moment when their eyes met, Mike saw something very different in Dwayne's gaze. A coldness, a sharpness far beyond the friendly demeanor he had been showing all along. Was he imagining things? Or was that a genuine flicker of wariness from Dwayne Johnson? Mike swallowed, turning to Harris as if waiting for one final signal. But Harris stepped back, no longer doubtful, and gave Mike a meaningful pat on the shoulder, as if to say that this was a lesson he would need to remember. Mike nodded, but his feet remained rooted to the spot. He felt that this could be his last chance to confirm the truth. If he let go now, the man would leave, and if there was something truly wrong, it would fade into nothing, leaving him with a nagging feeling he might never erase. But if he did something now, if he called the man back, he would risk making a fool of himself, possibly even being reprimanded for wasting the time of a famous person. Dwayne Johnson's words still echoed in his mind. "You're just doing your job." So, would he dare to keep doing it, despite all the eyes on him, despite the risk of being seen as overreacting? The man was nearly at the door. Mike felt his heart race. The door was about to open. Now he had to decide. Mike stood still, his eyes fixed on the broad back of the man approaching the door. Every muscle in his body was tense, torn between trusting his instincts or letting go to avoid becoming a laughingstock within the security team. But before Mike could do anything, Harris stepped up, lightly tapped him on the shoulder, and chuckled softly, his tone calm, yet humorously dry. "Come on, Mike, relax. You just held up one of the most famous people in the world. You've been tense enough already." Harris's words seemed like a signal, and instantly the atmosphere in the room thawed from its previous cold, tense state. Another staff member burst out laughing, breaking the lingering silence. "Mike, I gotta give you credit. You're the first one to keep the rock here for so long." The room erupted in laughter. Some staff members even clapped as if congratulating Mike for pulling off the most brave move of the year. Mike blushed, feeling like his face was burning hot enough to fry an egg right there. He didn't know how to react. A part of him felt relieved that things hadn't escalated, but another part still lingered with a quiet, persistent doubt inside. At that moment, a female staff member approached with a document, holding it up with a mischievous smile. "Mr. Johnson, could you sign this document?" Dwayne raised an eyebrow, half smiling, half amused. "Is this the incident report, or are you asking for my autograph?" His remark made everyone in the room laugh again. Another staff member patted Mike on the back, clearly enjoying the situation. "Mike, you just made it into the airport security history books. I bet this story's going to be all over the intranet tomorrow." Mike closed his eyes for a moment, sighed, then shook his head with a wry smile. If someone had told him this morning that he'd stop Dwayne Johnson at the security checkpoint, he would have laughed in their face. But now, it had really happened, and he was the main character in a somewhat embarrassing situation that would probably get him teased by his colleagues for months to come. Dwayne, still calm and humorous, took the pen from the female staff member, signed the document with a firm stroke, then handed it back with a friendly smile. "Here, I've signed it. But if I see this thing on eBay, I'll be back looking for you guys." His joke had the room bursting into laughter once more. Dwayne turned to Mike, his gaze still carrying a certain sincerity. "You did a great job. Not everyone has the confidence to do what you did without being swayed by pressure. Keep up that spirit." Mike swallowed hard. Despite still feeling a bit uncertain inside, he forced himself to nod. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson." Dwayne smiled, then turned to Harris. "So, am I free to go now, or do you want to check if I'm really the guy from Fast and Furious?" Another round of laughter filled the room. Harris raised his hand, shaking his head with a relieved smile. "No, Mr. Johnson. Thank you for your cooperation. We apologize for the misunderstanding. You can continue your journey." Dwayne nodded, waved a casual goodbye, then turned and left. Mike watched him go, still unsure of the strange feeling inside, but he knew that for now it was over. At least, the way everyone saw it. Dwayne slowly walked toward the door, but when his hand touched the handle, he suddenly stopped. A brief silence filled the room, making the laughter that had just sounded moments ago seem cut off by an invisible line. He turned his head, his sharp gaze scanning each person, finally stopping on Mike's face, still flushed with embarrassment. Mike looked at him, still a little confused by what had just happened. He had never been in a situation like this before, a mix of shame, relief, but also full of contradictions. He felt like he had made a huge mistake, yet at the same time a small part of him couldn't quite believe everything had ended so simply. Dwayne stared at Mike for a few seconds, then suddenly smiled, a smile not too wide but enough to break the tension hanging between them. He took a step forward, getting a little closer to Mike, and then extended his hand. "You did well." Mike looked up at him, so surprised he couldn't say a word. "Not everyone has the confidence to do what you did without being swayed by the pressure of those around you." Dwayne continued, his voice calm but with a certain weight. "If I were the bad guy, you'd be the hero." Mike swallowed hard, feeling the sincerity in those words, but at the same time, there was something inexplicable lurking in the man's every sentence. A strange feeling, as if something was being hidden, but there was no way to grasp it. Harris, the security captain, nodded at Mike, as if confirming that everything was fine. "You heard that, Mike. Not everyone gets recognized by The Rock himself every day." The room chuckled lightly, but Mike still hadn't fully shaken the chaos in his mind. He reached out and shook Dwayne's hand, feeling the strong grip from the man in front of him. Dwayne held the handshake a little longer than usual, as if to emphasize something. His eyes remained on Mike, deep and mysterious, but also with a hint of an unspoken warning. Then he let go of the hand, took a step back, patted Mike's shoulder lightly, and turned to leave. The door opened, light from the outside pouring in, and in an instant the man disappeared into the bustling crowd of the airport, as if nothing had ever happened. Mike stood still, staring at the door still gently swaying after it closed, a nameless feeling rising in his chest. Should he feel relieved? He asked himself, but there was no answer. Outside the room, the noise of the airport continued to echo as if it had never been interrupted. But for Mike, everything had changed. And the worst part was, he wasn't sure if he had been right or if he had made a huge mistake that he would regret later. Mike stood still, his eyes fixed on the door that had just closed, but his mind was spinning with conflicting thoughts. The feeling of unease was still there, smoldering like a fire that hadn't quite gone out, but he couldn't do anything more about it. Harris lightly patted him on the shoulder, his tone calm but with a touch of humor. "Hey, don't overthink it. You just had a memorable day." Mike nodded reluctantly, though something still lingered in his mind. But just then, a phone rang, breaking his train of thought. Harris pulled out his phone, glanced at the screen, and quickly answered. The security team around them started to return to their work, but when they saw Harris's expression change just seconds after answering, they paid closer attention. Harris frowned, then suddenly looked up, his gaze locking with Mike's. "Dwayne Johnson wants to talk to you." Mike froze. "What?" Harris handed the phone to Mike, who was still struggling to believe what was happening. But as soon as he put the phone to his ear, Dwayne Johnson's deep, powerful voice filled his ear. "Mike, you still there?" "Yes, I'm here, Mr. Johnson." A burst of laughter came from the other end of the line, and Dwayne continued, his voice natural and relaxed as if they had known each other for years. "I think I owe you a thank you. You did a great job today. I really appreciate people like you who take their work seriously." Mike didn't know how to respond. He could feel his colleague's eyes on him, waiting to see what was going on. "Thank you, but really, I was just doing my job." "Exactly, and that's why I want to do something special for you and your colleagues." Mike furrowed his brow, not having a chance to ask before Dwayne continued. "I've arranged VIP tickets for all the security staff at LAX to attend the premiere of my new movie. Front row seats, an after party, everything set up." In the room, a few security staff gasped. One person couldn't hold back, exclaiming, "What?" with excitement. Mike was still processing the information when Dwayne added something that nearly left him speechless. "As for you, Mike, I want to invite you to my movie set. Would you like to experience a day working with The Rock?" There was a silence that lasted for a few seconds. Mike's eyes widened, his heart racing so fast he could feel each beat echoing in his chest. He looked around, seeing everyone waiting for his response. I really don't know what to say. This is such a huge honor." Dwayne laughed. "Consider it an apology for making you tense all day today. You deserve it." Mike took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. Part of him felt lucky, but another part still felt like something was off, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. When the call ended, the room seemed to explode with excitement. Some of the staff were laughing loudly, patting Mike on the back, teasing him in a humorous way. "Mike, you're really lucky." From a regular security guard to VIP guest of The Rock. Ever thought about changing careers? Don't forget to bring us some souvenirs. Mike forced a smile, but something still gnawed at him. Everything had happened so fast, so perfectly, as if all his doubts had never existed. He knew he should be thrilled, but deep down, the biggest question remained. Was it all just a coincidence? Or was there something else that hadn't been revealed yet? While Mike was still trying to process everything, from being confused and embarrassed to being surprised by the special invitation from Dwayne Johnson. Outside, the online world had exploded in a way he had no idea about. Just minutes after the incident occurred, a passenger in the security checkpoint area posted a video showing Mike holding Dwayne Johnson at bay with the shocking title, "Even The Rock Can't Escape Security Checks." In the video, Dwayne Johnson is calmly sitting in the security room. Mike is standing across from him with a tense expression, and their dramatic conversation is clearly captured. The moment Mike, with a confused look, asks, "Are you sure it's really you?" And Dwayne laughs, replying humorously, "I don't think I'm cosplaying as myself." The online community immediately went wild over this situation. The comments flooded beneath the post. "The Rock gets checked too?" This security team is really serious about their job. Look at Mike's face when he realizes it's The Rock, poor guy. But gotta give it to Mike, he stayed calm. If it were me, I'd ask for an autograph first before checking him. Less than an hour later, the video spread like wildfire. Major news outlets began to cover it, treating it as a noteworthy entertainment story of the day. TMZ, Entertainment Tonight, The Hollywood Reporter, all ran headlines with humor. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson gets checked like a suspect. This story is cracking everyone up. Adorable moment. The security officer doesn't recognize The Rock, and his reaction is sending everyone into a frenzy. LAX airport security is probably the most serious team in the world. They dared to keep The Rock for extra screening. On Twitter, the hashtags "The Rock Bikim Tra" and Drakasan Bay LAX quickly trended. Fans around the world rushed to share their amusement with the story. Some humorously edited photos of The Rock in a prisoner's outfit with the caption, "The Rock detained at the airport for looking too suspicious. Who's going to save him?" Meanwhile, Mike's fans, who unknowingly became an accidental star, also started to rise. Some netizens found his identity, and it didn't take long for him to become the talk of the town. "Find Mike. We need an exclusive interview with him." Mike is the hero of the day. The airport security team really does their job well. Mike, who disliked attention, could only pick up his phone and see hundreds of messages from friends and colleagues spamming the group chat. "Mike, you're famous now. Buddy, have you seen your video? Over 5 million views." For the first time in history, security officers are getting global recognition for doing their job right. Mike put his phone down on the table, rubbing his head helplessly. He never thought a normal workday of his would become global news, but deep inside, he still felt a strange sensation, a feeling he couldn't quite name, a question that remained unanswered. While the whole world was laughing about the incident, Mike couldn't shake off the thought that, could it all really have just been a misunderstanding? Dwayne walked through the checkpoint and headed towards the boarding gate, walking with the same confident and relaxed demeanor as if nothing had happened. His familiar smile remained on his face, a symbol of calmness and self-control, qualities that had helped him build his image over the years. Passengers in the waiting area all turned to look at him. Some quickly raised their phones to take pictures, while others continued to gossip about what had just occurred. But for Dwayne, everything had been handled perfectly, just as he had hoped. He boarded the plane, made his way to his first-class seat, and leaned back into the chair with an unusual sense of relaxation. When the flight attendant came by to greet him, he returned the smile with a slight one of his own, then turned his gaze to the window, where the afternoon sunlight reflected through the clear glass. In a hidden corner of his eyes there was a glimmer of calculation. Meanwhile, in the security area, Mike remained standing still, his eyes following Dwayne's disappearing figure as he made his way to the gate. His colleagues continued to tease him about the recent event, but this time he didn't pay much attention. In his mind, the images from the earlier inspection replayed like a slow-motion film. He remembered every moment, from the initial suspicion to the alarm system going off, Dwayne's expression as he was surrounded by security personnel, and how he smiled and handled the situation with flawless ease. A part of him wanted to believe that he was wrong, that it was just a misunderstanding, but another part, one that he couldn't dismiss, whispered that something wasn't quite right. No one could be that perfect. No one. "Hey, Mike, are you okay?" Harris patted him on the shoulder, pulling him out of his thoughts. Mike nodded, but didn't say anything. "You've had a tough day, but look on the bright side. You just became the most famous security officer on social media." Mike gave a slight smile, but inside he still felt uneasy. "Do you think everything went a bit too smoothly?" Harris stared at him for a moment, then shrugged. "Maybe, but sometimes things just happen like that. You did your job, you had doubts, but in the end, everything became clear. The most important thing is you handled the situation professionally." Mike stayed silent. Harris might be right. Or perhaps there was something they had missed. In the first-class cabin of the plane, Dwayne Johnson closed his eyes and relaxed as the takeoff announcement came over the intercom. Everything had gone exactly as he had planned. A surprise check, a confident response, a dramatic turnaround. He lightly touched the watch on his wrist, a small gesture with deep meaning. No one knew that, in his backpack, there was a small USB stick cleverly hidden beneath the lining. No one knew that, just before reaching the security area, he had swapped to a different phone in his jacket pocket. And certainly, no one knew that he hadn't stayed at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel the night before. A faint smile appeared on his lips as the plane began to take off. Everything was just beginning. So, after all, Dwayne Johnson left the airport with a smile, leaving behind a memorable story that Mike and the security team would never forget. From a tense, worried staff member who had wrongly suspected the wrong person, Mike had inadvertently become the center of an unusual situation, even receiving a special invitation from the Rock himself. But was this truly just a misunderstanding? Or was there something hidden behind this security check? Should Mike have trusted his instincts from the start? What do you think about this situation? If you were in Mike's shoes, would you continue to question it or let it go? Leave a comment below to discuss. If you found this story intriguing and full of surprises, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up on Hope Stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.